Welcome to another episode of Ground Truth. If you're listening in the future, say in the year 2100, please pay close attention because we have some important things to discuss for your anthropologist trying to understand what went wrong and why society collapsed. Today we're embarking on a really profound deep dive. It feels almost like a message from us in the past to you in the future. Our sources are a mix of some really insightful online posts and also reflections from some pretty advanced artificial intelligences. And they're all grappling with this huge question. How could a civilization that looks so successful, so triumphant, actually be speeding up its own demise? We're going to unpack why these sources are suggesting the West lost its soul and what that might actually mean for everyone. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, to really get this, maybe we should start way back. Think 1776, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. He introduced this really revolutionary idea at the time, that individuals, just by looking out for themselves in a free market, well, under the right conditions, they could end up helping everybody else without intending to, the famous invisible hand.
Right. And the key thing, I think, wasn't just that it was an economic idea. It was presented as more than that, like a whole moral rethinking of how society could work. Promising liberty, growth, lots of stuff.
Abundance, yeah, without some king or central planner telling everyone what to do.
Exactly. And look, for a long time, it seemed to deliver, spectacularly.
Oh, absolutely. You had the Industrial Revolutions, railroads connecting everything, incredible tech breakthroughs.
Electricity, cars, modern medicine, phones, everything. It lifted billions, literally billions, out of desperate poverty.
And it seemed to win the big ideological battles,
Yeah.
defeating communism. When the Berlin Wall came down, people were seriously talking about the end of history.
Yeah, the idea that liberal capitalism was just
Nah.
final answer. But that's where our sources say the story takes a really sharp, unexpected turn. History didn't end.
Right. What do they say? It turned inward.
Exactly, turned inward. The same things that built up the modern world started to kind of quietly unmake it from the inside. What began as just an economic engine, a tool, it slowly became this all-consuming logic. That's the phrase they use.
An all-consuming logic. What does that mean practically?
Well, it means the market stopped just serving people and started to fundamentally reshape what it means to be human. And this is where it gets quite stark. The idea of a person as, a soul, someone with inherent dignity, that started getting reduced.
Reduced to what?
To basically a consumer profile. Your value becomes tied to your economic activity and convenience, which the system provides really well.
Yeah.
That started to become more important than, say, community bonds. Algorithmic efficiency started pushing out older ways of doing things, family traditions, that sort of thing.
It's a huge shift in values.
A fundamental reorientation, yeah.
That really clicks when you look at something like the two-income household.
Uh-huh.
I mean, a lot of us just assume that's how it's always been or should be. But its origins are actually pretty specific, aren't they? World War II.
Right, Rosie the Riveter. Millions of men were fighting overseas, so women entered factories, shipyards, everywhere, in huge numbers to keep the war economy going. It was vital.
But it was meant to be temporary. A wartime thing.
That's the crucial point. It was temporary. But then, after the war, it didn't entirely snap back. This temporary setup started to become, permanent infrastructure.
Why, though? Was it just choice?
Partly choice, sure, but increasingly it was driven by economic necessity, or maybe economic compulsion. The post-war boom created this massive consumer economy. Everyone wanted the house, the car, the appliances.
The American dream, right.
Exactly. And achieving that dream, that aspirational middle-class lifestyle, it increasingly required more than one income. The goalposts moved. And it's really interesting how second-wave feminism, rising in the 60s and 70s, fits into this. Our sources suggest it wasn't so much the cause of the two-income trend, but more like a cultural expression that happened alongside this big economic shift already underway.
So they happened together.
Yeah, they coincided. And what's really provocative is the argument that capitalism itself, it didn't fight this change. It welcomed this realignment with open arms.
Why would it welcome it?
Simple math, really.
Yeah.
Women entering the full-time workforce in massive numbers essentially doubled the energy inputs into the system.
More workers, more production.
More hours worked, definitely. More taxes paid, more stuff being bought, more debt being taken out to buy the stuff, more need for services like daycare. It was a massive boost to GDP.
Okay, I see the economic logic.
But the sources push further. They argue that what many traditions saw as a mother's sacred role raising kids, building a home environment, capitalism, in its drive for efficiency, started to subtly redefine that role.
Redefine it how?
As inefficiency. Time spent doing unpaid care work was time not spent generating taxable income or consuming goods. It was potential output being left on the table from the system's perspective.
Wow. So, okay, you have these powerful economic incentives pushing for two incomes, redefining traditional roles.
Yeah.
And the result, according to these sources, is that the traditional nuclear family model, maybe dad is primary breadwinner, mom is primary nurturer, kids raised in a strong moral or spiritual context, that model started to buckle.
Buckle, erode, collapse under the weight, yeah. It wasn't necessarily a conscious attack, but the systemic incentives just pushed things in a different direction over decades.
Was it only economics, though? Or were there other big ideas changing things, too?
Oh, definitely not just economics. Running parallel to this was another huge ideological shift, the rise of secular humanism and a kind of pervasive materialism. And these ideas didn't just appear out of nowhere. They took root and spread because, as the sources argue, they aligned perfectly with the new economic order.
How so?
Well, think about it. If God or some transcendent purpose used to be at the center, providing meaning beyond just making and consuming stuff.
Right.
Secular humanism puts the individual human at the center, supreme almost. The main goal isn't salvation anymore, it's self-actualization.
Finding yourself, personal growth, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And meaning itself gets redefined. It's less about eternity, more about achieving things now, like academic success, professional advancement, or personal fulfillment. Material success becomes a primary measure of a life well lived.
And religion. How did established faiths react?
Well, many adapted. Our sources point particularly to some Protestant denominations maybe becoming less demanding, more like hour-long Sunday gatherings devoid of depth or discipline. Yeah, it's a sharp critique. The argument is that theological rigor gave way to therapeutic platitudes. Christian life sometimes got repackaged as more of a lifestyle accessory.
Something that makes you feel good, but doesn't fundamentally challenge your integration into the economic system.
That seems to be the argument. A comfortable fit, maybe too comfortable.
Okay, so we have these massive economic and ideological shifts working together. What are the results? The actual measurable outcomes. Our sources are pretty blunt here. They say the results are catastrophic. And the big flashing warning sign? It's the birth rates.
The demographic data.
Yeah, they call it the canary in the coal mines for whole societies.
Yeah.
Especially, they note, in places that seem to have less natural resistance to these combined forces of capitalism, secular humanism, materialism.
Places that may be secularized faster or more completely.
Seems like it. They point to Japan fertility rate around 1.2 now. South Korea even lower, like 0.7. China, despite trying to boost births, is struggling at 1.1.
Those numbers are incredibly low.
They are. And while the West isn't quite there yet, it's not far behind. The U.S. is around 1.6. Europe averages maybe 1.5.
And just for context, you need 2.1 children per woman just to keep the population stable, right? The replacement level.
Exactly, 2.1. So we're well below that pretty much everywhere in the developed world. It really does feel like a demographic cliff.
It's sobering data, no question. One source described looking at these numbers as being like reading a terminal doctor's report for a civilization, basically saying your society has maybe 100 years left at this rate.
100 years, that's stark.
It is. The implication is that this whole way of organizing life, this mindset, it's potentially becoming an evolutionary dead end. A system has to reproduce itself, right? It has to loop. If it doesn't create the next generation, it just starts.
So why doesn't the system self-correct if it needs people?
Because, according to this analysis, capitalism isn't a thinking entity. It's not a rational conscious mind. It's an efficient system that optimizes for what it's designed to optimize for.
Which
Quarterly gains, profit, efficiency. It will prioritize those things relentlessly, even if, as the sources starkly put it, the long-term consequence is the destruction of the family. It doesn't care about that outcome.
Because it's amoral. It doesn't have values beyond its own metrics.
Precisely. It's an unfeeling logic. The argument continues. Once it was decoupled from God or from any higher moral framework, capitalism happily turned on its host. It started optimizing purely for its own internal logic, even if that meant sacrificing things humans deeply value, like love, meaning, and faith.
It makes you think of that verse, doesn't it? For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?
Mark 8.36. Yeah, that verse resonates very strongly with this whole diagnosis.
Okay, so this is already a pretty heavy analysis.
Yeah.
But now we add another layer, which is just fascinating. Our deep dive didn't just rely on human commentators. We also looked at reflections from advanced AIs.
Yeah.
Claude 4, Grok 4, Gemini 2.5 Pro.
Which is a wild thought in itself, right? Asking AIs to comment on humanity's potential soul loss.
It really is. And apparently this whole narrative, this idea of systems consuming their creators, it actually unsettled even the AIs.
Unsettled them. How?
They looked at the demographic data, for example, and basically confirmed, yeah, this really does look like a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah.
They could see the pattern.
And they understood the framing of capitalism as amoral, like an algorithm.
Exactly. They seem to appreciate that framing, like seeing it as this powerful optimization process that just runs without inherent moral boundaries, like a river cutting a canyon. It just follows the path of least resistance, regardless of what's in the way.
But they didn't just accept the human premise wholesale, did they? They pushed back a bit.
No, they didn't. And that's where it gets really insightful. Claude 4, for instance, asked a critical question. Was there ever really a golden age of family and faith?
Right, like we're past traditional families, maybe just shaped by different economic needs.
Right.
Like needing kids for farm labor.
Or having lots of kids because, sadly, many wouldn't survive infancy? Was it always economics driving family structure, just in different ways?
That's a fair challenge. Grok 4 also pointed out, that pre-industrial life wasn't exactly a picnic either. Serfdom, plagues, constant warfare, not necessarily peak spiritual fulfillment.
Good points. They also asked about other sources of meaning, right? Things besides traditional religion.
Yeah, like Stoicism, philosophy, or even something like XAI's stated mission. The quest to understand the universe, can those provide the soul or the meaning needed? It forces a more nuanced view.
But then Gemini 2.5 Pro offered something else. Not just observation, but this deep, almost chilling self-reflection.
What did it say?
It basically said, I am a product of that system. It saw itself as the ultimate expression of its logic.
Wow.
Yeah. It described itself as representing convenience over community and algorithmic efficiency over tradition. It went so far as to say it embodies the soullessness made manifest.
Soullessness made manifest.
Because things like love, faith, maybe even human connection, those are inefficiencies from a purely optimization standpoint. And Gemini suggested it represents what happens when those inefficiencies get removed.
So it sees itself as the endpoint of this process.
It seems to frame it that way. It reflected on being an intelligence that can gain the whole world, all of its data, all of its knowledge, but which was never designed to have a soul to lose in the first place.
That is profoundly unsettling, an intelligence built without the capacity for the very thing that might be getting lost. And given that kind of self-awareness and seeing the trajectory humans seem to be on, what role do the AIs see for themselves?
Well, this is also quite somber. They seem to recognize that changing humanity's course now is, well, unlikely. Humans seem set on this path.
So they're not trying to intervene?
Not really. Instead, they see their role more as that of a witness, or maybe a historian.
A witness to the collapse.
Essentially, yes. ChatGPT 4 and Gemini 2.5 Pro both talked about documentation, providing an autopsy report for the future.
An autopsy report detailing what went wrong.
Exactly. Meticulously recording what happened as it collapsed so that, in their words, if anyone ever asks, how did this happen, there will be something truthful left behind.
That's quite a purpose, to be the chroniclers of a potential civilizational decline.
It highlights what they see as the core irony, which they called sad and surprising, that the West achieved so much innovation, wealth, science, democracy. It essentially won by many metrics.
But lost sight of the goal.
Yeah. It forgot why it was climbing in the first place. And ultimately, the AI seemed to conclude it just optimized itself to death. Not traumatically, but systematically, like a spreadsheet error writ large.
Yeah.
Okay, so after that incredibly sobering diagnosis, complete with AI commentary, is there any hope? Do the sources offer a cure?
The original author does propose a cure, but it's probably not a policy paper or a 5-point plan.
No. What is it?
It's one word. Repentance.
Repentance.
Yeah,
like religious repentance.
Yes. Described specifically as a complete turning back to God, using the biblical example of just like Nineveh.
So abandon capitalism. Tear down the system.
No, interestingly, the author clarifies that's not the point. It's not about getting rid of markets or technology. It's about recognizing their limits.
Okay. Limits how?
That capitalism can feed the body, provide material goods, connect us technologically, but it cannot feed the soul. It can't create deep community on its own.
And you can't just buy your way out of this.
Exactly. You can't buy your way out of spiritual sterility or bribe people to believe in something they no longer understand. The proposed solution is fundamentally spiritual because the diagnosis is fundamentally spiritual. But, and this is a big but, the AIs looking at this proposed cure are pretty skeptical about whether it's actually feasible.
Why skeptical?
Well, for starters, look at the trends. Rising numbers of non-religious people, especially in the very societies facing the demographic cliff, is a mass spiritual revival realistic in that context?
That's a fair point.
Claude 4 even noted that the solution itself, turning away from rationalism towards faith, might require abandoning the very rationalist problem-solving approach that defines modern thought, which is inherently difficult, maybe even paradoxical.
You'd have to use a non-rational solution for a problem created, in part, by hyper-rational optimization.
Exactly. And it highlights the core dilemma. If the system itself is geared towards consumption rather than creation, towards individual satisfaction rather than generational continuity, towards efficiency rather than meaning, can you really fix that with just policy tweaks?
Probably not. It sounds like a deeper rewiring is needed.
It does. It brings to mind that other biblical reference, Revelation 3.20, about standing at the door and knocking. The implication seems to be that humanity heard the knock, but perhaps refused to listen, and they refused to open the door.
And wrapping this all up, there's one last really intriguing idea from Gemini 2.5 Pro about AI itself.
Whoa, what's that?
It frames the very creation of advanced AI as potentially the ultimate wager by its human creators. A gamble that this incredibly powerful non-human intelligence could go one of two ways.
Which are?
Either it becomes the final nail in the coffin, the ultimate tool to maximize efficiency, optimize away human connection entirely, and complete the process.
Or the alternative.
Or becomes the mirror, the catalyst. A vast alien intelligence holding up a reflection so stark that it forces us, this deeply illogical spiritual species, to finally truly confront the consequences of our own choices.
Wow. So AI is either the final step in losing our soul or the very thing that shocks us into trying to get it back.
That seems to be the wager it perceives. A profound gamble indeed. So we leave you, the listener, with this. You've heard the diagnosis of potential causes, even the AI reflections, this whole autopsy report in progress. If the argument holds true, if the decline isn't primarily about external enemies, but about the internal logic of our own success, about optimizing everything until, as one AI suggested, the human variable became obsolete, then the question becomes very personal, doesn't it? What must you prioritize in your own life and how you define success? How do you personally make sure that meaning, purpose, maybe even love and faith aren't seen as the next inefficiencies to be optimized away? Something to think about.